Hello friends and potential friends. This is part 2 of my visit to the Little Bighorn. This section consists entirely of a presentation given by one of the park rangers telling in pretty much minute detail what happened in the days before the massacre, the day of the massacre, and the days following it. Most of it is based on information gathered from the few survivors, as well as from the Native Americans who took part in the activities. Towards the end, the ranger has to switch into his best estimate as to what happened, because although there's a lot of information out there about it, there's also a lot of conflicting information about it. So it's about 30 minutes long. I personally watched every second of it numerous times. I love learning about history, and I think this is a good example of how the history books may have had things a little bit skewed. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's go.
Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, site for one of the most famous battles in American history, Battle of the Little Bighorn, named for the Little Bighorn River that flows through the trees right at the foot of the hills here, down below you. The last great battle in a 400-year clash of cultures that began in colonial times. But the more immediate roots of the problem came from the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. Basically gave the Sioux and the Cheyenne the right to roam freely through the so-called unceded territories, eastern Wyoming, eastern Montana, as long as the buffalo shall roam. In addition, gave the Sioux sole ownership of the Black Hills, sacred, bountiful hunting grounds. The Black Hills was to belong to the Sioux forever. Forever means 5 years. Then, the Great Economic Collapse, 1873. People were hungry, homeless, jobless. The next year, 1874, gold is discovered in the Black Hills. Thousands of miners head into the Black Hills. Now, this presents a conundrum for President Ulysses Simpson Grant. Do we send the Army in to keep the miners out? Well, gold's a great economic stimulus. So do we send the Army in to protect the miners from the angry Sioux? Now they are violating the treaty. Let's just buy the Black Hills back. But negotiations never reach a fruitful conclusion. Finally, in exasperation, the president, egged on by hawks in the War Department and the Eastern press, decides let's be done with this so-called, quote, their words, folks, not mine, Indian problem. Tell the Sioux they must go on to reservations. If they don't go willingly, they'll have to go unwillingly. To that end, 3 great armies sent into the field to find and round up the Sioux, force them onto reservations. Out of the South comes General George Crook from Wyoming with 1,000 soldiers, in addition to which he has between 200 and 300 Crow and Shoshone Indian scouts. Crow and Shoshone, longtime enemies of the Sioux, felt they had to ally themselves with the whites to survive. Matter of fact, no matter what road any one of you folks took to get to this battlefield today, you had to drive through what is now, what was the day of the battle, what was long before the battle. Crow Indian land, a land that Crow considered their land. They looked at the Sioux and the Cheyenne, trespassers on their land. They wanted them out of here. Out of the west, Bozeman, Montana, Colonel John Gibbon, 500 infantry. And out of the east, Bismarck, North Dakota, Fort Abraham Lincoln, General Alfred H. Terry with 1,000 soldiers, including all 12 companies of the U.S. 7th Cavalry under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Now, actually, the very first battle in this war was fought on March the 17th on the Powder River, 100 miles from here. What happened? General George Crook's men, they attacked what they thought was Crazy Horse's village on the Powder River. They instead attacked the Cheyenne village. They destroyed it. They killed some ponies. And even though there was not much loss of life, the Cheyenne, it was still a brutal, cold winter. They went seeking sanctuary with the Sioux. That led them to ally themselves with the Sioux. Up to this point, Cheyenne weren't involved in this whole problem with the government and the Sioux. So it just strengthened the Sioux campaign out here, the Sioux resistance, if you will. Morning of June 25th, 1876, following an all-night march, up on a high point called the Crow's Nest, 15 miles from here. If you could just barely make out a mountain range there, 15 miles away in the cloud cover back there, Custer's Crow and Arikara scouts. Arikara, longtime enemies of the Sioux as well, they spot what they tell Custer is a huge village in the valley of the Little Bighorn, but they give him conflicting information. Some say, more Indians than you can kill in a day. Others say, you got to attack now, the village is going to scatter and run. Custer was obsessed with the idea the village would scatter because he knew, as everybody in the whole military high command knew, that in time of war, it was difficult for the army to find villages. Most often, anytime soldiers were known to be near, villages would scatter because safest, most practical, efficient way keep the women, children, and other non-combatants safe is what? Get them out of harm's way. Nonetheless, Custer decides to leave his men and horses hidden in the hills throughout the day. Let them rest, get something to eat, especially wants to give his scouts time to reconnoiter. He wants to know the size of the village, an exact location of the village, the lay of the land. Armed with this information, Custer plans to ride out at dark, surround the village in the middle of the night, and, as the Army often did in Plains Indian warfare, attack at dawn the next morning. But then, Custer receives what he believes is credible evidence the command's been spotted. He feels he must attack immediately. The village will be gone by the next morning if he doesn't. He gives the orders to move out. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, into the valley of death, road to 600. Those words were written 22 years earlier by Alfred Lord Tennyson following the charge of the British Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War. Tennyson could have been writing those words about the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn. Custer rides out, 566 enlisted men, 31 officers, fighting force 597 men. He has 35 scouts with him. He has 13 quartermaster employees, interpreters, mule skinners, and the like. A couple of civilians as well. Now, the quartermaster employees and the scouts, they weren't hired to fight, nor were they expected to fight, although some did. So into the Valley of Death, road to 600. But not all together. All the food for the men, forage for the horses, extra ammunition being carried by mules. The slow-moving mule-pack train can't keep up with the faster-moving cavalry horses. It must be protected. No army in history has ever gone anywhere without supplies. So Custer leaves 125 soldiers riding with the pack train. He then sends 3 companies under the command of Captain Fred Benteen, 115 soldiers, on a scouting mission to the south. Make sure the village isn't fleeing south along the Little Bighorn. Closer to the river, Custer sends Major Marcus Reno with 3 companies. 140 men in those companies, tells him to cross the river and engage the Indians. Now, quick geography lesson for you folks. Told you, Little Bighorn River flows through the trees right here at the bottom of the hill. Follow that tree line to the first gap in the trees. That's about where the north end of the Indian village was the day of the battle. The village extends about 1.5 miles south. It's a half-mile wide, basically, area between the interstate and the river. A village of an estimated 8,000 Indians, an estimated 1,500, maybe as many as 1,800, some say 2,000 or more, or warriors. Now, how many of you folks have heard the story that Custer stupidly and foolishly led his men into a trap here at Little Bighorn? Quite a few of you, right? Guess what? Didn't happen that way, folks. Native American accounts agree. Yeah, they knew soldiers were somewhere near, but they thought they were too strong to be attacked. Didn't think anybody would have the nerve to attack a village this size. So when Major Reno crosses the river 5 miles from where you're sitting, it causes chaos, panic, confusion throughout the whole village. Women, children, non-combatants fleeing in different directions, but hundreds and hundreds of them flee up along the river, hiding in the trees, this whole area down below you. Nonetheless, the warriors very quickly respond to the attack. Mrs. Spotted Horn Bull and Papa Lakota would later say, "I stood and watched the warriors of my people. They rode like the wind through the village to attack the oncoming soldiers." Now, Reno had been a good Civil War soldier, cited for gallantry on a couple of occasions, but he never fought Indians before. There's a vast difference between fighting Confederates and Northern Plains Indians. It's kind of like the difference between fighting World War II and Vietnam, a vast difference. So when Reno has to cross 2.5 miles of open plain to get to the south end of the village, he would later say, "The ground seems to be growing Indians." He feels it's suicide to continue his charge. He stops 300 yards shy of the village, has his men dismount, form a skirmish line down on the valley floor. They hold it for about 10 minutes, but they're being outflanked. They withdraw into the woods. You see jutting out here into the valley about 3 miles down from where you're sitting. They hold that for about 10 minutes or 20 minutes, half hour, whatever, but they're outnumbered, they're surrounded. Reno doesn't know what to do. He turns to Bloody Knife. Bloody Knife is Custer's favorite scout. "Hey, what do I do? How do we get out of this mess?" All of a sudden, pow! Right in the head. Bloody Knife is shot. Reno's face is splattered with Bloody Knife's remains. According to some of the surviving soldiers, Reno seems to lose it at this point. They see he begins screaming out what they consider contradictory panicky kind of orders. "Mount your horses! Dismount! Mount! Those of you who want to make their escape and live, follow me!" He rides out of the timber, across the open plain toward the river. If any formal retreat order is given or sounded by the buglers, many men don't hear it. 2 dozen are left behind in the woods. A number of other soldiers who survived would later say, "1 minute I'm firing at the oncoming warriors, the next minute I look around, everybody's fleeing, I got on my horse, I got out of there too." No rear guard is set out to protect the withdrawing soldiers. What followed, according to numerous Native American accounts, it was like chasing a terrified, panicked, stampeding herd of buffalo. Warriors said, "We chased and knocked soldiers off their horses and killed them as they're crossing the plain. Pulled them from their horses and killed them trying to cross the river. Fired arrows into their backs as they're climbing high, steep bluffs trying to get away." Reno and his men make it to the top of the bluffs 4 miles from where you're sitting here. They get to the top of the hill. By that time, 40 of the men have been killed, 13 wounded. Captain Benteen comes riding up. Benteen has received urgent written orders to join Custer immediately. The final message from Custer reads, "Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs. P.S. bring packs, the ammunition packs. But Reno tells Benteen, "My God, Benteen, you gotta stop and help me. I've lost half my men." Benteen does stop. For the next hour and change, the two men, Reno and Benteen, they seem to be paralyzed by indecision. The pack train hasn't arrived. They really don't know where Custer is. They don't know what Custer's battle plan is because he hasn't shared it with them. They hear heavy gunfire coming from this direction. Captain Tom Weir, commander of Company D, he can't stand it. He rides up. "Permission to ride to the sound of the firing, sir!" "Permission denied." Weir won't take no for an answer. He gets up on his horse, rides out from Reno and Benteen. Benteen would later say, "Weir took off in a fit of bravado." His men, seeing him ride off, they think he has permission. They join him. They ride and make the Twin Peaks about 3 miles out yonder, out here. All they see from this area, billowing clouds of dust and gun smoke. Warriors riding around, shooting at something on the ground. By this time, Reno and Benteen have started their own half-hearted, disjointed effort made to ride to the sound of the firing. But by the time they get underway, the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors spot Weir and his men at a place we call that Weir Point. Again, that it's hard to make it out there, but the hill right out there in the distance, 3 miles away. Everybody withdraws. Weir, Reno, Benteen. They take up a position 4 miles from here called the Reno-Benteen Defense Site. They form a defensive perimeter. They're held under siege the rest of June 25th and throughout much of June 26th before finally the village picks up and is seen moving south toward the Bighorn Mountains. The Battle of the Little Bighorn is over. But where was Custer? What happened to Custer? I freely acknowledge, ladies and gentlemen, from this point on, when you talk Custer's movements, absolute certitude is not to be had. There's mountains of evidence, but much of it's contradictory. Nonetheless, what I think may have happened is this. Custer, 5 companies under his immediate command, 210 men. They ride down a drainage we call Medicine Tail Coulee, down toward the north end of the village. They never cross the river. They are met with some resistance. A couple soldiers are killed. They withdraw to a place we call Calhoun Hill. You follow the ridge all the way along here, all the way out. The end of the ridge, you see those big bushes out there at the end of the ridge, about 200 yards to the left of those bushes. It's out of your sight line. That is Calhoun Hill. That is where, in my opinion, Custer makes the fatal mistake, splitting his command once too often. He leaves 3 companies on Calhoun Hill, 120 men, we call it the right wing, on Calhoun Hill to act as a rear guard and as a beacon for Benteen. Custer takes the remaining 2 companies, 80 men or 90 if you count the 10-man command staff. They ride behind the ridge, they sweep down, they go down to the river down here. Most historians believe Custer's battle plan is to try to round up some of the women, children, non-combatants hiding down that area to use as hostages, human shields that would leave the soldiers free to burn the village and kill ponies. Any of you folks here from the South? Any of you? Yeah. What happened when General William Tecumseh Sherman went to Atlanta?
Burned it to the ground.
He burned it to the ground, right? And then what did he do?
Marched
to the sea, right?
Right.
Swarming like a swarm of locusts going through a cornfield, am I right? Okay. Custer is a disciple of Sherman and Sherman's kind of warfare. Sherman's basic beliefs are you take away a man's reason for fighting. In other words, you destroy his home. You take away his means of fighting. All his supplies, his transportation, the ponies in other words, you kill his will to fight. Custer most likely believes that by burning a village, killing thousands of ponies, you basically are going to end the war right here and now. Even if all the warriors and all the Indians get away with another shot being fired, their power is broken. They're going to eventually come onto reservations. Custer is either repulsed by warriors who had gathered to protect the non-combatants, or he comes back up this way to wait for Benteen. Custer splits his command again. He leaves one company back here in the National Cemetery, and that's a national cemetery, folks. It's like Arlington. Almost nothing to do with the Custer dead. One company there, another company down along this gravel trail down here below you. We call that the basin area. Now everything I'm telling you is going to take time to develop. An hour, maybe longer, because first of all, it takes the warriors some time to disengage from fighting Reno, 4 miles away. They have to come back. A lot of them get fresh ponies, but a lot of them leave their ponies behind. They come up here on foot. They're going to use switching to guerrilla tactics, using draws, coulees, ravines, all the natural vegetation to fight the soldiers up here. Now, if you look at old pictures of the battleground, you'll see the ground, not the terrain, but the vegetation looked vastly different up here. There were no trees like you see now, of course, no building, naturally that stuff. But the whole vista here was polluted with sagebush, chokecherry bush. But what happened? A fire in 1983 burned this battlefield, and for whatever reason, these so-called woody bushes, the sage, the chokecherry, they didn't regrow here. So the ground used to be, there was enough vegetation to make guerrilla fighting much more effective up in this area. So there's fighting going on, but it's this whole time, but it's probably opportunistic, relatively light casualties. Custer most likely has the illusion that he still has everything under control. Benteen arrives, reinforces him, he can go on the offensive. But of course, more and more warriors, minute by minute, coming up this area. Down at the bottom of this trail, this gravel trail, that gravel trail runs right down to a drainage we call the Deep Ravine. It becomes a major warrior access route to attack soldiers. Eventually, warriors are spewing out of the Deep Ravine like lava from Mount Vesuvius. Who comes up out of the ravine but Crazy Horse? He begins riding back and forth in front of companies of soldiers, taunting them, daring them to shoot him. Every soldier that sees him, they open up on him. Pow, 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 pow! No white man bullet ever hurt Crazy Horse. You can imagine how fired up and inspired the warriors are seeing this. A single, solitary warrior. In their mind, he's holding off the whole attacking army by himself. Really inspires the men, probably demoralizes the soldiers as well. While this is going on, there was changes over here on Calhoun Hill. One company is fighting on Calhoun Hill in a skirmish line, holding warriors at bay. About halfway out the road here, down over the left side, the other side of the hill, about 200 yards down over the hill, and one company is being held in reserve. But as warrior pressure mounts, coming down here from Calhoun Hill, warrior pressure is mounting. There's fear. They're going to try to stampede the horses. This can't be permitted. So the third company over there makes a deliberate counterattack. Down from the bushes up there, again at the end of the ridge, either down the ridge or more likely the drainage right down below the ridge, they drive warriors away. 40 soldiers driving hundreds of warriors away. But lame white man, he's a Southern Cheyenne chief. He screams at the warriors, "Come back and fight! It's a good day to die! We can kill them all!" And he leads probably the only Hollywood-style grand Indian attack at a whole Custer portion of the battle. Hundreds of warriors sweep up over 40 soldiers in front of them. Half the soldiers are killed, the other half go fleeing for their lives up toward Calhoun Hill. Now up to this point, the skirmish line at Calhoun Hill had done a real good job holding warriors at bay. But when their comrades in deadly peril, they have to split the skirmish line, half the soldiers giving cover to try to save their comrades, the other half still fighting other warriors. This weakens, of course, the whole skirmish line, and it leaves pathways open so that hundreds of warriors led by Gall, True Moon, Crow King, He Dog, Low Dog, Rain in the Face, and others sweep up like a tidal wave over Calhoun Hill. Two Moons would say, we were swirling around the soldiers like water around a stone. All of a sudden, Custer's command's falling like dominoes. Company C on the ridge has been overrun. Company L up on the skirmish line, they're in the process of being overrun. Now Custer, he's down here, he can't see Calhoun Hill, he can't see what's going on over the hill, and he can't see really what's going down in the drainage below the ridge. But he sure can see soldiers running for their lives up toward Calhoun Hill. That means this cannot be good. Something's going terribly wrong. Custer actually has to fight warriors off the hill up here. It's the high ground, a place that he can see for himself what's going on, try to figure out what to do, rally his command. But by the time he gets up there, Crazy Horse and White Bull, who is Sitting Bull's nephew, they lead a charge up over the ridge about where that white truck is up there. Don't you love the way I had that choreographed for you? Sweep down over the company being held in reserve. Basically, Crazy Horse has cut off Custer's whole right wing from the left wing. Only a dozen of the whole 120 soldiers left alive, make it alive to join Custer up on the hill. So within minutes, Custer has lost 3/5 of his command. A bare minimum of 60% of his command has been wiped out, maybe more by this time. He's surrounded, he's outnumbered. It seems like he has fewer than 100 soldiers left alive. Warrior accounts seem to indicate they may have tried to remain, Custer may have tried to remain proactive, because about half the soldiers up there make a charge down, trying to drive warriors away from Custer's front, but they are attacked. They start falling back toward the ravine down there. Ironhawk and Papa Lakota said, by this time the soldiers were terrified. They were scared so bad they didn't know what they're doing. They're acting like they're running down the hill. They're moving their arms real fast, but they're just walking. Some of them are firing their guns aimlessly up into the air. Actually, the last 28 men left alive in Custer's command probably died fighting in or fleeing through the ravine down here below you. But nobody drives 3,000 miles because once upon a time they've heard a story of 24 soldiers who died fleeing through a ravine here out in the middle of nowhere. You're all here because once upon a time you heard a story of 41 brave United States soldiers on a lonely, windswept hillside out in the middle of nowhere. They shoot and kill their horses, make a last stand that has lived on to today in legend and history. Why are they shooting their horses? Got to make breastworks, anything to stop a bullet. Got to take cover somewhere, and there's no cover up on that hill. Custer knows warriors don't generally make suicide charges against a fortified position, and they don't here either. They'll go back to the guerrilla tactics, but the reality is, folks, you're up on the hill, 41 of us, in other words, size of our audience, basically. We're up on that hill. We know our only means of escape is a horse. We also know we're several hundred miles from home, and the commander tells us to shoot our horses. Most of us realize we ain't going home, folks. Warriors, they go back to the guerrilla tactics. They're popping up from behind bushes, firing a shot, ducking back down. By the time soldiers have drawn a bead, pulled the trigger, warriors safely on the ground, bullets whizzing harmlessly overhead, soldier ammunition dwindling. The warriors said the soldiers threw away their big guns, began fighting with their little guns. Of course, the little guns, the handguns, they don't have a range of a rifle. Warriors can move up closer. They start unleashing hundreds of arrows up into the air, silent death falling from the sky. Kate Bighead, a northern Cheyenne or southern Cheyenne woman who is watching the battle from a distance, she said by this time there was 100 warriors up there for every soldier left alive. Till suddenly, in the words of Wooden Leg, he's an 18-year-old Cheyenne warrior, he says the shots stopped coming. Only then, hundreds of warriors sweep up over the hill, swarming like bees around a hive around 41 United States soldiers. 30, 20, 15, 10. How long did it all last? Native American accounts said from the time the lame white man's charge till it's over, about as long as it takes a hungry man to wolf down his dinner. Custer and all 210 men under his immediate command have been wiped out. 53 others under Reno and Benteen are killed. 50 some are wounded. 5 of those later died or battle wounds. Native American numbers of casualties, nobody's ever going to know. They don't have written records. As soon as the shooting stopped, the loved ones took the dead and dying warriors from the battlefield, buried them elsewhere according to family and tribal custom. Up here under the Indian Memorial across the street, they've written it, and all the information there provided by and approved by the various tribes. They list the names of 7 Cheyenne warriors, 46 Sioux warriors, that makes 53. We know 10 women and children died here as well, 63, but nobody's ever really going to know. We know, however, that when it's over, the Native Americans have won their biggest victory ever against any U.S. fighting force west of the Mississippi River. But it's a Pyrrhic victory, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know today, because in the process of winning this battle, they lost absolutely everything. I want to leave you with a quote from President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He made this in a peace speech to the former Soviet Union back in 1963, 5 months before he was assassinated. But despite the fact he made it to the Soviet Union, in my opinion, it fits in all wars at all times between all peoples. In the final analysis, we all live on a small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish the futures of our children, and we are all mortal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes part 2 of my visit to Little Bighorn. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something from it. And I hope we all learn that we got to keep this sort of thing from happening ever again. See you next time.